Welcome back, sleep professionals. Let's talk about sleep center facilities. Just like there are standards for sleep technologists, there are standards for sleep facilities and the equipment they use. Sleep studies used to be performed almost exclusively in hospitals, but now that the demand has increased, sleep studies are run in regular office buildings, doctors' offices, and some in hotels. Raleigh Neurology first operated out of a hotel before moving into their current facility. The patient's room would be joined to the control room so the technologists could still go in and out of the room. When sleep studies were first performed, they were run with huge machines that would use pins to make the waves on the paper. At the end of the night, you would be stuck with a ton of paper that you would have to go through one sheet at a time to stage and then try to score respiratory without zooming out. We look at a 2-minute window when we're doing respiratory because it kind of squishes everything together and you can see the breaths easier. Not with paper stuff. You have to stretch out the paper and look at it that way. Very difficult to do that. Very time consuming. Now that we have computer programs for sleep, it can provide instant analysis and help with interpretation. It used to take hours to stage and score a study. Now it literally takes less than an hour for some. Some of these tasks can be outsourced as well. There aren't a lot of them, but there are remote scoring jobs where people will score studies just over the internet. When selecting or building a sleep facility, there are a few things to consider. Environmental noise can be an important factor. A sleep lab I worked at in Sanford had a next-door neighbor with a fire department and a hospital on the other side. There were always vehicles and sirens coming and going at all times of the night. You also have to consider where all the noise might come from. If it's a busy highway or street, and if it's a hospital location, keep it away from the helicopter pad and the trash dumpsters. Even if you have white noise machines and earplugs, environmental noise can be almost impossible to get rid of. Another consideration for your facility is the including of oxygen and how you'll use it. Typically, hospitals have oxygen flowing through pipes in the walls, and they just have to hook it up, a hookup in a lot of rooms that you can just plug into. Private labs typically use oxygen concentrators or oxygen cylinders. You should be thoughtful about when you're using an oxygen concentrator because they can make a room really hot and they're incredibly loud. My sleep labs used to have 30-foot long oxygen tubing so we could keep the concentrator out of the room and run a long hose into the patient's room. Planning should be heavy at the beginning of opening or running a sleep lab. There are more cables and wires that you can imagine to make all these workstations active. Not only do these wires need to be hidden from view, but they also need to follow equipment guidelines. There are rules for a lot of wires, like if they're too long, they won't have the capacity to transmit information correctly. A lot of these wires are actually made in the sleep lab, meaning there's a big spool of wire that you can run out and cut pieces from and use a tool called a crimper to put on the little connectors. Because of this, it's easy to make a wire that could be too long. If you consider electricity and its characteristics, the longer the wire, the longer the electricity has to travel. Electrical interference is also a possibility with cables. There are unshielded and shielded cables, meaning the cables inside might be protected with a layer of like foil or something. It should also be considered if there is room for more beds to expand. There need to be plenty of accessibility options for handicapped or disabled patients, and there need to be wide doorways and hallways for wheelchairs and rails in the bathrooms for patients to hold on to. The AASM only requires you to have at least one. When designing the patient's room, there are a lot of things to think about, including all the things that the AASM requires. The AASM requires that there's 24 inches of clear space around 3 sides of the bed, and there should be room for the patient to move around freely. And it's not a requirement, but it's recommended that at least 140 square foot of the room is used, or at least a 140 square foot room is used. You also need to make sure there's enough room for emergency personnel to maneuver around the patient's room if there is a crisis. A bigger room is definitely better in that situation. And in others, I've hooked up patients in small and big rooms, and having space is a lot nicer. You also want to add some art to the walls and furnishings to make it less like a medical facility and more like a home environment. The patient's room should have some bedside stands or bedside tables, so the patient has a place for their stuff, but you also have room for your equipment. All furniture should be able to withstand at least 500 to 800 pounds, especially the beds and the chairs. Morbidly obese patients are frequent visitors to the sleep lab, and you need equipment to accommodate them, rip belts included. I've had to put two together one time just for it to fit around a patient. Windows should be blacked out, especially when running daytime studies, or if there are street or parking lights just outside the windows. You may decide to run daytime studies in rooms that don't have windows. Again, a TV in every room would be nice, but it's up to the budget and the preferences of the medical director as to if they want to put up with the TV keeping up patients or not. Raleigh Neurology had one in the lobby and one in the hookup room, and when the patients weren't trying to go to sleep, they could stay in there and watch, but we didn't have them in the rooms. Something on the walls, art, pictures of the staff, things like that to make it more welcoming is nice. Ideally, every room should have temperature control. You'll have a spectrum of needs as far as comfort goes, and AC and heat are two big ones when it comes to sleep. Sometimes the AC or heat doesn't come on quickly enough, and so fans are good to have, especially when patients are sweating, which happens a lot in the sleep lab. Appropriate lighting should also be considered. You want to stay away from super bright white and go towards a soft watt bulb that has more of a reddish tint instead of blue. The red end of the color light spectrum doesn't make your pupil contract or dilate, which makes red light in the dark a better option if you're trying to illuminate something without hurting your eyes. Sound is also something to consider. I've had a lot of patients complain that the room was too electronic sounding. I'm guessing from the high-pitched noises, but I think some people just make things up. White or brown noise machines can be good to use. Brown noise is just like white noise, but it's a lower pitch, so it's not terribly shrill like some white noise machines can be. The AASM requires there to be at least one bathroom for every 3 bedrooms, so at least every bathroom for every 3 patients. Every bathroom must be equipped with a toilet and a sink, and at least one bedroom and bathroom must be handicap accessible. When building the lab, you should consider wall or floor mounting sinks and toilets. Floor mounted sinks and toilets can hold considerably more weight without special supports. These sinks and toilets must be able to support 800 pounds and be floor mounted. In a perfect sleep world, every room would have its own bathrooms, and there are a lot of labs like that. Showers are also a super nice bonus, but also consider the risks, because a patient can slip and fall in the shower and really hurt themselves. Also, if you're trying to leave quickly in the morning, but your patient is taking a 45-minute shower, that's going to hold you up. Also, people might ask you if you have any toiletries for the shower, so you will be expected to have those as well. The AASM requires the technologist control room to have minimum amounts of space. At least 20 square feet per testing room, or at least 40 square feet. This control room should be centrally located so technologists are able to move quickly from one location to the next. You don't want to be 2 hallways and a floor down when a patient needs to get up and use the bathroom. I had that once. I was 2 hallways down from the patient's room, and I couldn't hear when the other patients were calling me when I was out of the tech room, so I would have to run back and forth, and it was not safe. Patient privacy is also paramount. You shouldn't have computer monitors facing outside of the tech room so that they can be seen in the hallway. Also, don't allow patients in the control room. They might see things that they don't understand and interpret them incorrectly, or they might have thieving eyes and steal identifying information. All the control rooms and the patient room should be equipped with a backup power source, and usually it's a big backup battery machine-looking thing. You'll know when these go bad which they seem to do somewhat frequently because they'll beep really loud in the middle of the night. It's happened to me a bunch. It depends on how good of a battery it is, for how long they will last when you need it, and how much equipment you're trying to use on it. Sometimes it's enough to actually finish a study. Sometimes it's just enough to wrap one up. I've never had a power outage happen to me, but I've heard many people say they've been in labs that lose power and it just never came back. That's very difficult because it's dark and there usually aren't emergency lights in the rooms. The patients have wires on and you're trying to take them off in the dark. It's a mess. Ideally, you don't want to have any visible wires in the control room, but you must remember a lot of these labs weren't built to be sleep labs, so they've most likely been retrofitted with sleep equipment. It's almost impossible to have no visible wires, but they should be organized and neat without slack. Also, you can't really have them permanently hidden, like permanently in the walls, because equipment goes bad. Lightning strikes buildings sometimes, and they can fry wires or hardware. I've had to rewire a few rooms at the Raleigh Neurology Lab and for a few microphones, and it's not fun. Going through these drop-down ceilings, there's lots of dust. In the end, you really do the best that you can to make a wire-free environment. So these are not all AASM requirements, but they're suggestions. Some labs have hookup rooms, and some labs use the patient's room to hook up in. Usually hookup rooms have more than one patient getting hooked up. I've hooked up patients in their room in a hookup room, and frequently just outside in the hallway. Wherever everyone, including the technologist, is most comfortable is best. As a technologist, you have to move around easily, and you don't want to be confined to such a small place that you're tripping over the wires and the patient to get your job done. When using collodion or acetone, you really need to be in a hookup location where flammable materials can be safely stored and used in conjunction with the ventilation system. We'll talk about collodion in the next presentation. Typically, you don't have to worry about sharps containers or anything like that with needles in the sleep lab, but if you have blood from the patient, you should properly dispose of whatever got blood on it in a biohazard waste bag. Those kinds of wastes are usually incinerated rather than taken to a landfill. Also, if using acetone or collodion remover, which has a lot of different chemicals in it, like ether, you have to dispose of the applicators or whatever else is soaked in those liquids to special containers. You can't just throw them away. Some labs have continuous monitoring of the patient hookup area to monitor for safety reasons. They'll have a camera. And not all of the cameras record, but they can be helpful, especially when their patient has an accident or a seizure or parasomnia events and they walk into the room. Usually they don't get too far, but you never know. Not recommended or suggested, but nice rooms to have would be a quiet place for a lead technologist or a physician to stage and score records, generate reports, troubleshoot studies, and provide interpretations. A patient lounge or common area where patients can get out of the limited space in their room is a good way for them to relax and stretch out, especially if they're there during the day for an MWT or MSLT, excuse me. There will always be at least one utility room. There has to be a place to store all the CPAP masks and hoses and spare parts, humidifiers, a place for laundry if your lab does the laundry, all the wires and sleep equipment. You need a place for the consumables like paste, prep gel, gauze, Q-tips. You need a place for the toiletry items like hand soap, paper towels, toilet paper. You need a place for the respiratory equipment, like all the O2 concentrators, cylinders, albuterol stuff for asthma patients. I don't write all this down. I'm just kind of making a big deal about storage. Office space stuff like paper, ink, pens. There's a lot of stuff in the sleep lab, and you have to have enough room for all your stuff. Also, providers or lab managers may also have their own rooms for office space. All right, we'll talk about all that next stuff, the equipment, in the next installation of Sleep Wars with Mr. Goodwin. Enjoy the rest of your day, evening, or wherever you're at.